After the tragic passing of his wife in a car accident 6 months ago, life for the man had become a blur of sadness and loneliness. Their once warm and lively home now felt like an empty shell, echoing with memories that haunted every corner. He spent most of his days lost in thought, replaying moments from their life together. It was hard to imagine living without her. Every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture, even the smell of the house reminded him of her. One day, while scrolling through a local job listing app to find someone who could help with household chores, something caught his eye. There on the screen was a profile picture that made his heart skip a beat. The woman in the photo looked exactly like his late wife. Her face, her smile, even the way she tilted her head. It was uncanny. For a moment, he froze, unsure if what he was seeing was real or just his mind playing tricks on him. But no, it was real. She was real. He hesitated at first. Hiring someone who bore such a striking resemblance to his wife felt strange, almost wrong. Wasn't it unhealthy to dwell on the past like this? Yet, as much as he tried to push the thought away, the idea lingered. Maybe having her around would ease some of the pain, even if just a little. He told himself it wasn't about replacing her. It was simply practical. He needed help around the house, and this woman seemed qualified. So, after wrestling with his thoughts for hours, he decided to go ahead and hire her. When the woman arrived, at his doorstep, the resemblance hit him even harder than before. Standing there in person, she looked so much like his wife that for a split second he forgot how to speak. His throat went dry, and his hands trembled slightly as he welcomed her inside. "Come in," he managed to say, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. She smiled politely, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. As he showed her around the house, pointing out where things were kept and explaining her duties, he found himself stealing glances at her whenever she wasn't looking. It wasn't just her appearance, it was the way she moved, the way she spoke. Even the smallest gestures reminded him of his wife. He couldn't help but wonder if fate had brought her into his life for a reason. Was this some kind of sign? Or was he losing his grip on reality? For the first time since his wife's passing, he felt something other than grief. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was close. A flicker of hope, perhaps. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to move forward. But deep down, he knew this wasn't healthy. He was clinging to the past, using this woman as a substitute for someone who was gone forever. Still, he couldn't bring himself to let go. Not yet. As the days passed, she settled into her role smoothly. She cleaned the house, cooked meals, and did everything she was hired to do without complaint. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a perfectly normal employer-employee relationship. But for him, it was anything but normal. He found himself watching her constantly, studying her every move. Sometimes he'd leave old photos of his wife lying around, hoping she'd notice the resemblance or ask questions. But she never did. Instead, she remained professional, keeping her distance and focusing on her work. Despite her professionalism, he couldn't shake off the feeling that she was somehow connected to his wife. It wasn't logical, but emotions rarely are. He started imagining scenarios where she really was his wife, sent back to him by some miracle. At night, when the house was quiet and the world outside was asleep, he'd lie awake, torn between guilt and longing. Was he doing the right thing? Or was he crossing a line he shouldn't? Meanwhile, the woman began to sense that something wasn't quite right. She noticed how often he stared at her, and how many pictures of another woman filled the house. It made her uncomfortable, but she brushed it off, telling herself not to overthink it. After all, she needed the job, and he seemed harmless enough. Little did she know, she was stepping into a situation far more complicated than she could have imagined. The days turned into weeks, and the man grew more and more attached to the woman who worked in his home. At first, it was subtle, just a lingering glance here, a soft comment there. But soon it became impossible for him to hide his feelings. He found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain, even to himself. Every time she walked into a room, his heart would race. Every time she smiled, he felt a pang of both joy and sorrow. It was as if she were a living, breathing reminder of everything he had lost. He tried to act normal, to keep things professional, but it was getting harder with each passing day. He started leaving out old photos of his late wife, not just one or two, but entire albums. He wanted her to notice, to say something about how similar they looked, but she never did. Instead, she kept her head down, focusing on her work and avoiding any personal conversations. Her silence only fueled his obsession. One evening after dinner, he finally broke the barrier he'd been trying so hard to maintain. "You remind me so much of someone I used to know," he said, his voice trembling slightly. She looked up, from the dish she was drying, her expression unreadable. For a moment he thought she might ask who he was talking about, but instead she simply nodded and changed the subject. "Dinner was good tonight," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Thank you." He felt a mix of frustration and relief. On one hand, he wanted her to acknowledge the resemblance, to understand why he felt the way he did. On the other hand, he was terrified of what might happen if she figured it out. What would she think of him? Would she see him as some kind of monster clinging to the past in the most desperate way possible? Despite her attempts to keep things professional, the woman couldn't ignore the growing tension in the house. She noticed how often he stared at her, how his eyes followed her every move. It made her uncomfortable, but she didn't know how to address it without making things worse. So she kept quiet, telling herself that this was just a phase, that he would eventually move on. But then, small things started happening that made her uneasy. One morning, she found an old photo of his late wife lying on the kitchen counter. The woman in the picture looked exactly like her. At first she thought it was a coincidence, but when she saw another photo the next day, and then another the day after that, she began to feel like she was being watched. Not in a creepy, stalkerish way, but in a way that made her question whether she was truly safe in this house. She tried to brush it off, telling herself that he was just grieving and that she shouldn't take it personally. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. There was a desperation in his eyes that scared her, a neediness that went beyond ordinary grief. She started second-guessing her decision to take the job. Maybe coming here had been a mistake. One afternoon, while cleaning the living room, she overheard him talking on the phone. He didn't realize she was there, and his words sent chills down her spine. "I can't stop thinking about her," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "It's like she's here again, like she never left." She froze, unsure of what to do. Should she confront him? Should she pack her bags and leave right then and there? But where would she go? She needed this job, and besides, she didn't have any proof that he was dangerous. It was just a feeling, a gut instinct that told her to be careful. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the conversation in her mind. Was he talking about her? Or was it just his late wife? Either way, it was clear that he wasn't dealing with his grief in a healthy way. She decided to keep her distance, to stay alert and watchful. If anything seemed off, she would leave immediately, no questions asked. The next day, she noticed something strange. A framed photo of his late wife had been moved from the hallway to the dining table. It was almost as if he wanted her to see it. When she asked him about it, he shrugged and said, "I thought you might like to see it. You remind me so much of her." His words sent a wave of unease through her body. She forced a smile and quickly changed the subject, but inside her mind was racing. Was he doing this on purpose? Was he trying to make her feel like she was stepping into his wife's shoes? She didn't know what to think, but one thing was certain: she couldn't stay here forever. As the days went by, the tension between them grew thicker. He became more open about his feelings, confessing how much he missed his wife and how much she reminded him of her. At first, she tried to comfort him, offering kind words and listening patiently. But soon, his comments became obsessive, bordering on inappropriate. "You're exactly like her," he said one evening, his voice filled with longing. "If only you could understand how much you mean to me." She felt a lump form in her throat. This wasn't just grief anymore. It was something else, something darker. She realized that she wasn't just working for him. She was becoming a part of his fantasy, a stand-in for someone who was never coming back. And that realization scared her more than anything. She knew she had to make a decision soon. Staying here wasn't an option. Not if she wanted to protect herself. But leaving wouldn't be easy either. He had grown dependent on her presence, and she wasn't sure how he would react if she suddenly disappeared. Still, she couldn't let fear dictate her life. She had to find a way out. Before it was too late. It was a rainy afternoon when the woman decided to clean the attic. The man had mentioned that it needed tidying up, and she figured it would be a good way to stay busy while avoiding any awkward conversations. The attic was dimly lit, with boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls. Dust particles floated in the air, catching the little light that seeped through the small window. She sighed, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. As she sorted through the clutter, she stumbled upon a dusty cardboard box labeled Memories. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it carefully. Inside were old letters, journals, and photographs. Her heart sank as she realized what she was looking at. It was a treasure trove of memories from his life with his late wife. At first she felt guilty for snooping, but something about the box pulled her in. Maybe if she understood more about who this woman was, she could make sense of why he was so fixated on her. She picked up one of the journals and flipped through its pages. The handwriting was neat, almost poetic, and the entries painted a picture of a woman who loved deeply but also struggled with her marriage. One passage stood out to her. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. He loves me. I know he does. But sometimes it feels like he's trying to control every part of me. I need space, freedom, but he won't let me go. I'm scared of what might happen if I try to leave." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She read them again, trying to process what she was seeing. Was this really how his wife had felt? Trapped? Scared? She flipped to another entry, and then another, each one reinforcing the same message. His wife hadn't been happy in the relationship. In fact, she had been planning to leave him before her untimely death. Her hands trembled as she closed the journal. This changed everything. The man wasn't just grieving. He was clinging to the memory of someone who hadn't wanted to stay. And now, here she was, stepping into the shoes of a woman who had tried to escape. The thought sent chills down her spine. She quickly put the journal back in the box and closed it, her mind racing. That evening, she decided to test the waters. During dinner, she casually brought up his late wife. "You must have loved her very much," she said, keeping her tone light. He looked up from his plate, startled by the question. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then slowly, he nodded. "Yes," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "She was my world." "What was she like?" she asked, trying to sound curious rather than suspicious. "You don't talk about her much." His expression darkened, and he hesitated before answering. "She was complicated, beautiful, kind, but stubborn too. Sometimes I think she didn't understand how much I cared for her." She noticed the way he avoided eye contact, the slight quiver in his voice. Something about his answer didn't sit right with her. "Do you ever wish things had been different between you two?" She pressed gently. He stiffened, his fork clinking against his plate as he set it down. "Why are you asking me this?" he snapped, his tone suddenly sharp. "What does it matter now? She's gone." The shift in his demeanor caught her off guard. She quickly backtracked, mumbling an apology and changing the subject. But the damage was done. He spent the rest of the meal in silence, his jaw clenched and his eyes distant. She could feel the tension thickening in the air, suffocating her. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the conversation in her mind. His reaction had confirmed her worst fears. He wasn't just mourning the loss of his wife. He was haunted by guilt. And now, she realized, she might be walking into a trap. The resemblance between her and his late wife wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It was a dangerous connection, one that could put her in harm's way if she wasn't careful. The next morning, she woke up early and decided to confront him directly. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. She found him in the kitchen, sipping coffee and staring out the window. Taking a deep breath, she sat down across from him. "Why did you hire me?" she asked bluntly, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. He looked at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why me specifically? There are plenty of people who could have done this job, but you chose me." "Why?" For a moment he didn't answer. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "You remind me of her," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I saw your picture online, it was like fate gave me a second chance." Her stomach churned. A second chance? What did that even mean? Before she could respond, he continued, his words tumbling out faster now. "I know it sounds crazy, but being around you makes me feel closer to her, like she's still here somehow." She stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just grief talking. This was obsession. And she knew then that she couldn't stay here any longer. Staying meant becoming a part of his delusion, a stand-in for someone who had never truly been happy with him. But leaving wouldn't be easy either. He had grown too attached, too dependent on her presence. If she left, how would he react? She forced herself to stay calm, nodding slowly, as if she understood. "I get it," she said softly. "Losing someone you love is hard, but you have to let go eventually. You can't keep living in the past." He frowned, shaking his head. "You don't understand. You'll never understand." And maybe he was right. Maybe she couldn't fully grasp the depth of his pain. But one thing was clear. She had to protect herself. Whatever bond he thought they shared, it wasn't real. And if she stayed, it would only end badly, for both of them. That night, as she packed a small bag with essentials, she made a plan. She would wait until he fell asleep, slip out quietly, and call a friend to pick her up. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all she had. She didn't want to risk confronting him again, not after seeing the desperation in his eyes. As she zipped up her bag and placed it under the bed, she heard footsteps outside her door. Someone was pacing the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat. Was he checking on her? Or was he just restless, unable to sleep? Either way, she knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow she would be gone. No matter what it took, she would find a way out of this house, and away from him. The tension in the house had reached a boiling point. The man's behavior was becoming more unpredictable, and the woman knew she couldn't stay any longer. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the hallway made her heart race. She felt like she was walking on eggshells, never knowing what might set him off next. Her plan to leave quietly in the middle of the night had been ruined when she heard him pacing outside her door. It was clear he wasn't sleeping, and she couldn't risk sneaking out now. The next morning, she woke up early, determined to face him one last time. She didn't want to run away without at least trying to make him understand how unhealthy this situation was, for both of them. When she entered the kitchen, he was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in his hand. His eyes were red as though he hadn't slept all night. He looked up when she walked in, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "I need to talk to you," she finally said, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her stomach. He nodded slowly, gesturing for her to sit down. "What is it?" he asked, his tone cautious but tinged with irritation. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about why I'm here. Why you hired me. And I realized something." She paused, looking directly into his eyes. "You didn't hire me because you needed help around the house. You hired me because I look like her." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he slammed his fist on the table, making her jump. "Of course that's why," he shouted, his voice shaking with anger. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I can forget what she looked like, how she smiled, how she made me feel?" She flinched but forced herself to stay calm. "That's not healthy," she said softly. "You're using me as a replacement, and that's not fair to either of us." His face softened slightly and he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I miss her so much," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Every day feels empty without her. But when I see you, it's like she's still here." She felt a pang of sympathy for him, but she quickly pushed it aside. Sympathy wouldn't save her from the danger she was in. "I'm not her," she said firmly, "and no matter how much you want me to be, I never will be. You have to let her go." He shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. "I can't. Don't you understand? I loved her more than anything. Losing her destroyed me." Wanted to tell him that love shouldn't destroy someone. It should build them up, make them stronger. But she knew he wasn't ready to hear that. Instead, she stood up and grabbed her bag, which she had packed earlier. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice firm. "You can't keep me here." He shot up from his chair, blocking her path to the door. "No, you can't leave," he said, his voice rising. "You're all I have left of her. If you go, I'll have nothing." Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked at him. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the raw pain, clawing at his soul. But she also saw something else, something darker, a possessiveness that scared her to her core. She realized then that he wasn't going to let her leave easily, not without a fight. "I'm sorry," she said, taking a step back. "But I can't stay here. This isn't helping either of us." Before he could respond, she bolted toward the door, clutching her bag tightly. He lunged after her, grabbing her arm and pulling her back. "You can't leave," he yelled, his grip tightening painfully. "Why won't you understand? You're exactly like her." Panic surged through her body as she struggled to break free. "Let me go," she screamed, twisting her arm until she managed to slip out of his grasp. Without wasting another second, she ran out of the house and into the street, her heart pounding wildly. She kept running until she reached a nearby gas station, where she collapsed onto a bench, gasping for air. Her hands were trembling, and tears streamed down her face as she pulled out her phone. She dialed a friend's number, explaining everything in a rushed, panicked voice. Her friend promised to come pick her up immediately, but until then, she sat alone, replaying the scene in her mind over and over again. When her friend arrived, she climbed into the car, still shaking. "Are you okay?" her friend asked, concern etched across their face. She nodded, though she didn't feel okay at all. "I just want to get as far away from that place as possible," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As they drove away, she glanced back at the house in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, she thought she saw him standing in the doorway watching her leave. But then the car turned a corner, and the house disappeared from view. Over the next few days, she tried to put the experience behind her. She stayed with her friend, avoiding contact with anyone who might lead him to her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Something about the way he had acted, the things he had said. It all felt too intense, too calculated. She decided to do some digging, hoping to uncover the truth about his late wife's death. It didn't take long for her to find what she was looking for. One evening, while scrolling through old news articles online, she stumbled upon a report about a fatal car accident that had occurred 6 months ago. The details matched perfectly: the date, the location, even the description of the victim. But what caught her attention was a small note at the bottom of the article. Witnesses had reported seeing signs of tampering with the victim's vehicle before the crash. At the time, investigators dismissed it as speculation, citing lack of evidence. No arrests were ever made. Her blood ran cold as she read the words, tampering. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the car, and based on everything she had seen and heard, she couldn't ignore the possibility that he might have been involved. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. All this time she had thought he was just a grieving husband unable to move on. But now she wondered if his grief was masking something far more sinister. Had he killed his wife because he couldn't bear the thought of losing her? Or worse, because she wanted to leave him? She knew she had to confront him one final time, not just for her own peace of mind, but for justice. Whatever had happened to his wife, The truth needed to come out, and she was the only one who could make sure it did. The woman knew what she had to do, but the thought of confronting him again terrified her. She had managed to escape his house and find temporary safety with her friend, but the weight of what she'd uncovered was too heavy to ignore. If he really had something to do with his wife's death, she couldn't just walk away. She owed it to the woman who had died and to herself to get answers. After days of wrestling with her fear, she finally made up her mind. She would go back to the house one last time, but this time she wouldn't be alone. She called a trusted friend and asked them to wait nearby in case things went wrong. It wasn't much of a safety net, but it gave her a small sense of security. Armed with the article about the car accident and a voice recorder hidden in her pocket, she returned to the house where everything had unraveled. When she knocked on the door, her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. For a moment she thought he might not answer, but then the door creaked open and there he was, looking as tired and broken as ever. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw her standing there. "You came back," he said softly, almost like he couldn't believe it. She nodded, forcing herself to stay calm. "We need to talk." He hesitated for a second before stepping aside to let her in. The house felt exactly the same as she remembered, quiet, heavy with memories and suffocating in its emptiness. They sat down at the kitchen table, and for a while, neither of them spoke. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the mix of relief and suspicion that she had returned. "I know why you hired me," she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "And I know how much you loved her. But I also know that something isn't right." His expression hardened instantly. "What are you talking about?" She pulled out the printed article and slid it across the table toward him. "I read about the accident, about how her car was tampered with. Did you know about that?" For a long moment he just stared at the paper, his face pale and unreadable. Then slowly, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples like he was trying to block out the world. "You don't understand," he muttered under his breath. "That's why I'm here." She shot back, her voice rising slightly. "To understand. To make you tell me the truth." He looked at her then, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. "Do you think I wanted her to die?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Do you think I could live with myself if I did?" "Then tell me what happened," she demanded, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "Because someone tampered with her car, someone killed her, and based on everything I've seen, it points to you." He froze, his jaw tightening as if he were fighting back tears or guilt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he broke down. His shoulders slumped, and his head fell into his hands. "She was going to leave me," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "She told me she couldn't take it anymore, that she needed space. I begged her to stay, but she wouldn't listen." The woman listened intently, her stomach churning as the pieces began to fall into place. He continued, his words tumbling out faster now, like a dam had burst inside him. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I swear I didn't. I couldn't let her go, so I messed with her car thinking it would scare her, make her realize how much she meant to me. But it didn't work. It only made things worse." Her breath caught in her throat as the full weight of his confession hit her. He hadn't just been a grieving husband. He was a man consumed by obsession, willing to do anything to keep the person he loved from leaving, even if it cost her life. "And now you're using me to fill the void she left behind," she said quietly, her voice laced with both sadness and disgust. "Do you even see how wrong that is?" He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. "I know it's wrong," he whispered, "but I can't stop. Every time I look at you, I see her. It's like she's still here giving me another chance." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't a second chance. This is a nightmare for both of us." Without waiting for him to respond, she stood up and reached into her pocket, pulling out the voice recorder. "I recorded everything," she said firmly. "If you try to stop me from leaving or coming after me again, I'll turn this over to the police." His face went white, and for a moment she thought he might lash out. But instead he collapsed back into his chair, defeated. "Go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just go." She didn't hesitate. Grabbing her bag, she turned and walked out of the house, her legs shaking beneath her. As soon as she stepped outside, she ran straight to her friend's car where they were waiting for her. She climbed in and slammed the door shut, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. "Did you get it?" her friend asked, glancing at her worriedly. She nodded, clutching the recorder tightly in her hand. "I got it." They drove away, quickly, leaving the house, and him, behind. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of relief. But it was short-lived. The weight of what she had uncovered, and the responsibility of bringing it to light, was overwhelming. She knew the next step was to go to the authorities, but the thought of reliving everything scared her. Still, she reminded herself that justice mattered more than fear. Over the next few days, she worked up the courage to hand over the recording to the police. At first, they were skeptical, unsure whether her story held any merit. But once they heard the confession, their demeanor changed completely. Within hours, officers were dispatched to the house to question him further. By the end, statewide, the days that followed were a blur for the woman. After handing over the recording to the police, she couldn't stop thinking about what would happen next. She knew she had done the right thing, but it didn't make her feel any less uneasy. The man's confession replayed in her mind over and over again, his voice trembling with guilt, his face twisted with regret. It was hard to reconcile the image of the broken man she had left behind with the person who had tampered with his wife's car, setting off a chain of events that ended her life. The police took her statement multiple times, asking her to recount every detail of her time at the house. They wanted to know how long she had worked there, what she had witnessed, and why she suspected him in the first place. Each question felt like reopening an old wound, but she answered honestly, determined to see this through. Deep down, she hoped that justice would bring some closure, not just for her, but for the woman who had died. A few days later, news broke that he had been taken into custody. Investigators had found evidence linking him to the tampering of his wife's car, including fingerprints on certain parts of the vehicle that matched his own. Combined with the confession she had recorded, it was enough to charge him with manslaughter. The story quickly made headlines, capturing the attention of people across the community. Everyone seemed shocked that such a tragedy could unfold so quietly, hidden behind closed doors. For the woman, seeing the news reports was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt a sense of relief, knowing that he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the sadness she felt for everyone involved. The late wife who had lost her life, the man who had destroyed himself out of obsession, and even herself, who had become entangled in something far bigger than she ever imagined. She tried to move on with her life, but it wasn't easy. Every knock on the door or unexpected phone call sent her heart racing, fearing that somehow he might come after her. Her friends and family did their best to reassure her, reminding her that she was safe now. Still, the scars of those weeks lingered, haunting her dreams and coloring her thoughts. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, she decided to write a letter. Not to him, but to the woman whose memory had unknowingly guided her actions. She didn't know much about her, only what she had read in the journals and seen in the photographs. But she felt connected to her in a strange way, as if their lives had crossed paths despite being separated by time. "Dear stranger," she began, her pen hovering above the paper before finally settling into motion. "I wish I could have met you under different circumstances. From what I've learned, you were someone who deserved better. A kind soul trapped in a situation no one should ever have to endure. I hope you find peace wherever you are now." As she wrote, tears streamed down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of gratitude for the strength she had found within herself, for the courage to stand up against fear, and for the reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of light. Over time, she started to rebuild her life piece by piece. She found a new job, one that kept her busy and allowed her to focus on the present rather than dwell on the past. She reconnected with old friends and made new ones, slowly rediscovering the joy of ordinary, everyday moments. Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving forward, and that was enough. Meanwhile, the man's case continued to unfold in court. The trial dragged on for months, filled with testimonies, evidence presentations, and emotional outbursts. In the end, he was found guilty and sentenced to prison. During the sentencing hearing, he spoke briefly, apologizing not just to the court, but to the memory of his late wife. His words were raw and painful, a final admission of the love and loss that had consumed him entirely. For the woman, watching the outcome of the trial brought a strange sense of finality. It wasn't redemption. It couldn't undo what had happened, but it was accountability. And sometimes that was all anyone could hope for. In the years that followed, she rarely thought about the house or the man who had once haunted her life. Instead, she focused on creating new memories, building a future free from the shadows of the past. She still kept the letter she had written to the stranger tucked away in a drawer, a quiet reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And though she carried the weight of those experiences with her, she also carried something else: hope. Hope that even in the face of pain and loss, people can find a way to heal. Hope that truth, no matter how difficult, has the power to set us free.